Under the vaulted arches of the alien council chamber, the human envoy's voice carried without effort, amplified only by the stillness of those assembled. "Don't start a war you can't win." The words hung in the air, their weight obvious only to the one who spoke them. Across the chamber, the 6 ruling species of the Galactic Coalition reacted in ways that spoke volumes. Soft laughter from the Zrathi delegates, quiet derision from the sleek helmeted Shiren, an unimpressed twitch of a Tharvok's mandibles. To them, it was the bravado of a young species playing politics beyond its depth. They had ruled the lanes of the galaxy for centuries. Humanity had barely mapped a fraction of them. Their disdain was rooted in history, empires rising and falling while the Coalition stood unshaken. Human entry into the interstellar stage had been swift, disruptive, and in their eyes, unearned. The Terran fleet's rapid technological leap, the stubborn refusal to bend under economic pressure, the spread of human influence into lucrative trade corridors. These were irritations, not threats. The envoy's warning, they believed, was simply the noise of an upstart attempting to stake a claim in a game it could not possibly play. The meeting dissolved without ceremony, the alien delegates returning to their homeworld certain of their superiority. Yet even as the great hall emptied, the human envoy's eyes followed them, calm and unreadable. Outside the chamber, the gleaming spires of the Coalition capital reflected the warm light of its sun, and the galaxy spun on, unaware that the slow countdown to war had already begun. The first provocations came quietly, dressed in the language of routine patrols and security inspections. Coalition fleets began crossing deeper into human territory, their presence justified as a stabilizing measure in disputed sectors. Merchant convoys were halted, cargo seized under flimsy pretexts. Border colonies found themselves shadowed by alien warships whose weapons were cold, but whose intent was unmistakable. Humanity's response appeared muted. Naval commanders issued formal protests through the proper diplomatic channels, their language professional, restrained. Fleets pulled back from contested zones rather than escalate. The alien admirals mistook it for timidity. In truth, those quiet retreats were calculated, the movements of a chess player who knows the board better than the opponent's suspects. While alien warships paraded their dominance, deep within Sol's fortified inner defenses, another kind of preparation was underway. Massive orbital shipyards operated under blackout protocols, constructing vessels that didn't appear on any public registry. Civilian industries shifted subtly toward military production, each chain small enough to avoid notice, but together forming an undeniable tide. Intelligence units infiltrated alien comms networks, mapping fleet schedules, tracking logistical chains, cataloging every weakness in the Coalition's sprawling infrastructure. Human cyber warfare teams began testing intrusion techniques on low-priority alien systems, always withdrawing before detection, each attempt honing their methods. On Earth, the message was clear: unity above all. Political parties, corporations, and rival blocs set aside disputes in a rare moment of species-wide focus. The media avoided sensational panic, instead broadcasting calm, factual reports of the escalating tension. Public shelters were inspected and supplied. Spaceports drilled evacuation procedures. Children learned emergency protocols in classrooms as naturally as they once learned fire drills. Humanity, a species accustomed to surviving its own turbulent history, adapted with the same stubborn pragmatism it always had. When the formal declaration of war came, it did so with the grandiose flourish the Coalition was known for. The Council broadcast a vote across its territories, a majority agreeing that the Terran disruption could no longer be tolerated. Fleet movements accelerated overnight. Armadas of alien warships, some older than human spaceflight itself, set course for Sol's outlying colonies. The Coalition expected compliance within weeks, surrender within months. The first attacks fell upon fringe settlements, mining stations in the outer asteroid belts, agricultural colonies on lightly defended moons. Coalition ships struck fast, their superior numbers overwhelming local defenses. To observers, the pattern was clear. Humans fought briefly, inflicting minimal damage before breaking formation and retreating. Alien commanders read it as cowardice, or perhaps the desperate avoidance of inevitable defeat. What they failed to see was the precision behind every human withdrawal. Enemy formations were observed, recorded, analyzed. The trajectory of each retreat positioned human vessels in ways that offered clean lines of sensor tracking without revealing their own capabilities. Every battle, no matter how small, became another page in an expanding playbook of alien tactics, ship designs, and command styles. Civilian losses were tragic, but measured. Evacuations had often been completed hours before alien landings, a fact the invaders dismissed as coincidence. Yet the repeated absence of panicked masses should have hinted at something deeper, an unseen network of advanced early warning systems, human intelligence predicting enemy moves with uncanny accuracy. As the coalition celebrated its swift advances, the first signs of unease whispered through its ranks. Supply convoys found themselves delayed without cause. Routine communication channels experienced unexplained disruptions. Patrols reported human reconnaissance drones appearing and vanishing with disturbing frequency. Alien analysts raised quiet alarms that something was amiss, but their reports were buried under the weight of victory celebrations. The humans, meanwhile, continued to appear weak. Fleets pulled back from promising engagements. Garrisons were abandoned rather than defended. To the casual observer, the war was progressing exactly as the coalition intended. To those watching closely, however, a subtle shift was taking shape in the data. Alien fleets were being drawn farther and farther from their own logistical centers. Their supply chains stretched across vast, poorly defended regions of space. It was during a routine intelligence sweep that the first truly alarming discovery surfaced in Coalition Command, an intercepted human transmission, heavily encrypted but partially deciphered. Its content was brief, and the analyst who presented it hesitated before reading it aloud to his superiors. "They're not fighting to win," the voice in the recording said, cool and certain. "They're watching us." Alien war banners still fluttered over captured human colonies when the first cracks in the coalition's certainty began to form. Victory had come so easily, so predictably, that the commanders barely considered the possibility of a shift in the war's momentum. Fleet schedules rolled on without adjustment. Homeworld news feeds celebrated each new, liberated sector, and alien civilians believed the Terran threat was being swept away like dust on a steel floor. Yet beneath the surface of this confidence, faint tremors began to spread. It started with silence. 3 major coalition supply depots, sprawling complexes storing fuel, munitions, and repair parts, stopped transmitting. Recovery fleets sent to investigate reported only fields of drifting debris, the skeletal remains of cargo vessels still venting their atmosphere into the void. No survivors, no distress calls, no clear sign of who had struck. Each attack was surgical, timed to coincide with maximum logistical disruption. By the time the coalition realized the scale of the damage, frontline fleets were already feeling the effects. Delayed resupply, ration ammunition, engines idling in standby while captains waited for fuel shipments that would never arrive. Then came the navigational failures. Ships began to emerge from hyperspace miles off course, some in hazardous asteroid zones, others colliding with one another in the chaos of misaligned exits. Official reports blamed cosmic interference or mechanical faults, but crews whispered about something far more deliberate, a silent, invisible presence inside their navigation systems. Captains reported sensor ghosts shadowing their convoys, flickering in and out of range before vanishing entirely. The enemy they had mocked for retreating was suddenly everywhere and nowhere. Human operations escalated without warning. Coalition communications arrays began broadcasting false orders in perfect imitation of command signatures, diverting entire task forces to empty sectors, while human strike groups slipped past to hit strategic targets. Broadcasts appeared in alien cities showing their own commanders issuing surrender statements, fabricated but indistinguishable from reality, shaking civilian faith in the war effort. On occupied human worlds, resistance flared. Small acts of sabotage multiplied. Power grids collapsing at critical moments, repair bays exploding hours after alien ships docked, food supplies tainted just enough to render them useless. Alien patrols moved in larger groups, not out of discipline but fear. The first major space engagement of this phase of the war broke the illusion of easy dominance. A coalition fleet, confident in its superior numbers, moved to crush what it believed to be an isolated human defense line. As they close in, the human ship scattered, only to vanish entirely from sensors. Seconds later, they reappeared behind the alien formation, weapons already firing. What the Coalition thought was cloaking was more dangerous. Humans had mastered gravitational slingshot maneuvers, using planetary and stellar mass to master trajectories and re-enter combat at precise, devastating angles. In another sector, an alien task group pursuing retreating human frigates found themselves funneled into an asteroid belt. What they assumed to be random space debris shifted and closed in, revealed as heavily armed human corvettes lying in wait. In minutes, the Coalition ships were cut off, engines crippled, their distress calls jammed until it was too late. Survivors were scarce, their accounts painting a picture of an enemy that had studied them to the smallest detail and was now dismantling them piece by piece. Alien High Command convened emergency sessions. For the first time since the war began, the word defeat entered their private communications. Yet unity was fracturing. The merchant-minded theory demanded immediate negotiations to protect trade routes. The warrior-bred Tharvok called such talk dishonorable, urging escalation. Others, fearing human infiltration of their systems, withdrew fleets to defend their homeworlds. Every faction that pulled back left gaps in the front, and humanity exploited each one with precision. Refugee ships began to clog alien transit corridors, not human, but alien civilians fleeing war zones the Coalition could no longer protect. Images spread across the networks, burning orbital docks, silent fleets drifting in the void, Coalition soldiers surrendering to human marines who treated them not with cruelty, but with calculated indifference. That indifference was worse than humiliation. It implied confidence, a certainty that humanity no longer considered them dangerous. The war's narrative shifted in whispers before it became official. In darkened strategy rooms, alien officers admitted they were losing control. On the ground, troops began avoiding human patrol zones entirely, altering mission plans to reduce contact risk. Entire sectors that had been declared conquered months earlier were abandoned without public explanation. It was into this growing chaos that the most jarring event of the war occurred. Without warning, a full Terran fleet appeared in orbit above one of the Coalition's core worlds. Not a border system, not a contested trade hub, but a planet considered untouchable, deep within alien-controlled space. No alarms had been raised. No hyperspace signatures had been detected. The suddenness of the appearance was a violation of every known principle of space warfare. The alien world skies filled with the gleam of Terran hulls, their weapons cold but their positioning absolute. Every defense platform, every orbital station already targeted. Civilian traffic froze mid-orbit. Planetary leaders found themselves staring at the data feeds in disbelief. Their homeworld's defense grid rendered irrelevant before a single shot had been fired. Then the transmission came, calm and unhurried, echoing across every channel in the system. This war ends on our terms. There was no boasting in the voice, no theatrical threat. Only a simple statement of fact, delivered by a species that had warned them from the beginning. The fleets in orbit made no move to fire, but the message was unmistakable. Humanity now dictated the tempo of the conflict. The alien commanders understood, though few dared to say it aloud. The moment they laughed at the warning, the war had already been lost. Humanity had simply taken its time proving it. The fleets over the alien capital held their positions without haste, their silent formation more threatening than any display of firepower. Negotiators emerged from planet's surface, their transmissions heavy with demands disguised as concessions. They spoke of ceasefires, of returning to previous borders, of restoring trade agreements that had once favored the Coalition. The human response was measured, unyielding. There would be no restoration of the old order. The envoy's voice carried the weight of inevitability. The terms would be dictated by those who now control the skies. The aliens argued for honor, for preserving dignity. But honor had no currency here, and dignity had been forfeited when they underestimated the opponent who now sat across the table. The collapse of talks was immediate. Within hours, the Terran fleet shifted into coordinated action. Across the breadth of Coalition space, precision strikes erupted simultaneously. Communication relays that had been untouched until now were annihilated. Orbital shipyards were dismantled in moments. their superstructures falling into the gravity wells of their home planets. Power grids on strategic worlds went dark. In each case, the strikes avoided civilian centers where possible, focusing instead on the arteries that kept the Coalition's military machine alive. The destruction was exacting, surgical, and absolute. Entire sectors fell silent. Alien commanders, accustomed to waging war by grinding attrition, could not comprehend a strategy that dismantled their civilization without needing to occupy it. The galaxy had long viewed humanity as reckless, emotional, and undisciplined. What they saw now was something far more dangerous. A cold, calculated precision that sought not the annihilation of people, but the dismantling of their ability to ever threaten again. Still, resistance remained. The most warlike of the Coalition species rallied, unwilling to surrender even as their allies faltered. They called upon ancient pacts, promising glory to those who stood and fought. Their propaganda painted humanity as a scourge, a threat to all free species. And for a time it worked. Fleets from allied worlds joined the defiant stand, massing around the homeworld of the most militant race in the Coalition. Here, they promised, the tide would turn. Humanity answered with silence until the assault began. Terran fleets emerged at the edges of the system, their movements methodical, each advance supported by overwhelming coordination. Planetary defenses unleashed storms of fire, but the human formations absorbed the barrage, adjusting trajectories with chilling discipline. Landings began in calculated waves, precision drops into fortified zones, Marines advancing through alien cities that had been designed to repel any conceivable invader. The fighting was brutal, close quarters, and unrelenting. Human forces adapted to the alien environment in hours, using its hazards as weapons. Entire districts fell without the invaders ever exposing themselves to open lines of fire, their movements shielded by the terrain the defenders thought would protect them. Reports from the battlefield reached the remaining Coalition leaders, and their tone shifted from defiance to resignation. Commanders spoke of enemies who seemed to learn faster with every engagement, whose tactics evolved within minutes of contact, rendering carefully prepared defenses irrelevant. Soldiers described the unnerving professionalism of their opponents. Not cruel, but utterly without hesitation, advancing with the inevitability of a closing fist. The final days of resistance were marked not by decisive battles, but by the quiet realization that there was no path to victory. Alien fleets began withdrawing without orders, retreating not to regroup, but to save what remained of their home systems. Trade networks collapsed as transport vessels refused to enter contested space. The Coalition's unity shattered completely, each species turning inward in the hope of surviving whatever terms humanity would impose. When the surrender came, it did so without fanfare. A broadcast, transmitted on every available frequency, carried the image of the Coalition Council chambers. The seats were empty save for one figure, the human envoy from the war's first day. The same calm gaze swept the room, and the same voice spoke, unhurried and final. Don't start a war you can't win. The chamber's vast echo swallowed the words, sending them into every corner of the galaxy that now understood their meaning. In the aftermath, the Coalition ceased to exist. Its constituent species signed individual treaties with Earth, each one binding them to strict limitations on military expansion and territorial claims. The trade routes that had once been monopolized by the Council were open under human oversight. Worlds that had suffered under Coalition exploitation found themselves free to govern without fear of reprisal. Humanity did not claim these worlds, nor did they demand tribute. Their presence was less an occupation and more a permanent reminder of consequence. The cost of victory was not hidden. Terran fleets returned home with fewer ships than they had launched, and the casualty list filled public memorials across Earth and its colonies. Entire generations would remember the names of those who had fallen in battles fought light years from home. Yet the victory carried with it a new, undeniable reality. Humanity had stepped onto the galactic stage not as an upstart to be tolerated, but as a power to be respected. In the years that followed, alien leaders spoke cautiously to humans, their words measured and deliberate. Trade resumed under watchful agreements. Diplomatic exchanges became careful affairs, each side aware of the balance now in place. And across the galaxy, the story spread of the war that began with laughter and ended with silence, of the species that had been warned and ignored the warning and of the price they had paid. Humanity, for its part, did not seek to dominate the galaxy, but neither would allow the conditions for such a war to arise again. Patrols extended deeper into former coalition space, not for conquest, but for oversight. The human fleets became a presence in the darkness, a reminder that in the cold reaches between the stars, respect was not granted freely. And so, in quiet council chambers on distant worlds, alien rulers repeated the words to one another in private, like an old superstition meant to ward off disaster. They had learned, as the galaxy had learned, that there are some wars you cannot win. The humans had simply been the first to prove it.